And then I'll share my screen. And you should see the Confluence page here. I'm gonna put this over here. So I started a Confluence page to kind of collect our thoughts around what suggestions we might want to make for US CDI version 7. Version 6 was released, and I have a link to it here, and I also have a link to the US CDI Plus, where we might want to look for, or we could look for any elements that we see in there that we might think would be good to promote to core. And then I also have, and I forgot to open that up, so I'm going to go do that real quick here. Maybe quick, hopefully quick. If we want to talk about UDI, the PowerPoint that Cornelia put together for us like a year ago, I think, to kind of look at what's currently supported in IHELAW. So that's the specification for integrating between the IVD instrument and the LIS in terms of identifying the device that is performing the testing. So I'm thinking probably the most important one to talk about from our perspective is the UDI. I don't know if everybody has had a chance to look at what it looks like in version 6. There it is now. This used to be called implantable devices, and it's now been changed to medical devices. So as a whole, as an element, the unique device identifier has been in UDI for a while, but it was limited to implantable devices. And so now it's gotten opened up quite a bit. So I'm thinking that's probably um, what we want to talk about um, most. The other one is specimen acceptability. We had prior submitted a request to rename it to specimen condition because that's really what at least the US core vocabulary is based on and written for. So those were the two things I could think of. But I'm going to quit talking here for a minute and let other folks chime in if this is what we want to talk about.
Yeah, if we're
Um,
gonna do like specimen acceptability, like we've been talking about on the specimen calls and some of the O&O calls, is making sure that there's like kind of specimen condition acceptability. So there's the specimen reject reason, like the criteria that a laboratory has in accord with CLIA for rejecting a specimen, right? And that's usually it's usually as a one of the reasons, but not the only reason for cancellation of a lab test. So it's on the order side, usually. And then there's this specimen acceptability criteria, so which is kind of related to it's the specimen condition as you were indicating. So if something is reported, especially as part of a panel, like there's hemolysis, it may come off of an instrument, it may be manually assessed and usually put into a comment with how something is not reported, like a potassium as part of a BMP as an example. So if it's hemolyzed, that's not reported out. It's not allowed to be reported out because it impacts the result values. You don't want to cause patient harm, but you have to indicate not only for that potassium, why you're not reporting it out is due to the hemolysis. Usually it's graded moderate, but then also for the other items in that panel that you can report out, they were also performed off that same tube or specimen. And so those, hemolysis is also indicated for those. So that would be like related to the observation or the result reporting side of things. But we can get into more detail when we get to that topic because that's a little complex.
yeah. So I think especially since I was able to share the PowerPoint that Cornelia and Ralph put together a while ago, maybe UDI is the first one we want to tackle. And Cornelia, I know you're on, and since you made it, do you want to go through it, or do you want me to just go through it, or because I don't want to steal
Yeah.
your thunder, because
No,
it's
no,
your
no,
presentation.
please. No, please. I mean, we can go by both ways. It's really more than a year ago that I did it, so or
Right.
even yeah. So, but I can go through. I mean, we had, let's say, as a bracing thing, exactly. We were looking as Roche, and also then together with Abbott and bioMérieux in somehow a way how to transmit the UDIs, because yeah, that's something important in the future for us as a manufacturer. We do have this information on the instrument plates, so it's available. Nevertheless, it's not available in, let's say, in an electronical format, leaving the instrument. And yeah, and there were some open points already from the first ask, right? So UID data elements is how it's written in LEADER. So the question is it the same as UDI? And I think there was a common agreement. Yes, it's going to be it's the same, right? But maybe also this feedback should go back to the LEADER team, because there are several standards, many documentations in the meantime, right? Which clearly explains a UDI and maybe not so much what is a UID. Then let's say if as a manufacturer the information is somewhere known from which device results are coming, so the LIS itself, they can concatenate this UDI out of the different HL7 fields and the components and subcomponents, right? So, but is that reliable enough? It's a question. Another one is then shall or can we apply the same patterns for analyzer UDI and reagent UDI? Because that's kind of the next thing, right? You also would like to know with which assay or reagent kit a sample was measured. So that means then more and more UDIs. And can we work on a translational architecture for LEADER using LIVD files and concatenate the information on LIS level? Exactly. So there are some open points.
Oops,
a long
sorry.
time ago. Yeah, no problem. And then we kind of first started, okay, and I think this audience knows it in the meantime very well. If not, just quickly raise your hands, then I know. Or we can kind of double check. And Ricky, whenever you feel like additional information is necessary, jump in, right? But
Oh,
I think,
of course, yeah.
yeah, we started with these things coming from LEADER. So a UDI always consists of a device identifier and a production identifier. And of course, there are some delimiters necessary. And I think this you can see nicely on the very bottom, exactly, because every value or stands for something, and like the green one is the device identifier, and on the production identifier there are different possibilities. For the instrument, it's typically only the serial number, right, which is important. For other devices, let's say, also maybe the manufacturing date, the expiration date, lot or batch number are important. And let's say the UDI explanation showed that in this way, that there you can even add more if you're using these right values in the brackets, because this value in the brackets explains what the next figure is. Yeah. And that was already very good that we had this, that GS1 stepped in, right, and gave some kind of a format, also called application identifiers, because, yeah, the one thing is the human readable interpretation. And as soon as you start to compile that for code, you already face an issue with delimiters or missing delimiters, and that's now a good way how they come up with this, creating this application identifier, and then you basically can just create one string of information later on. And these are the different chosen application identifiers for now. Might have changed in the meantime as well. Yeah. So then we should try to show on a very simple example first, where you have like one analyzer UDI and one reagent UDI, and the two together will generate you a result. But there, of course, are more complex examples where there are multiple analyzers involved to create the final result, as well as multiple reagent UDIs. For example, for the buffer, for this and that, and all the different boxes you would load on an instrument with containing reagents, each of them already today has a UDI on its label, right? So what would you do in such a case? And I think that is also not yet solved. But at least, you know, from a just already shape this kind of need, right? One will not be sufficient. Yeah. So maybe we can jump to the next slide. And yeah, and here we come into the HL7 and what is written there and what are requirements. And I think I can just let you read the also, oh no, I think also HL7 came up with a proposal at some point of time. It wasn't part of the standard yet, right? It was this document called HL7 Cross Paradigm IG and UDI pattern release 2. So they came up and they also listed this, let's say for me, important application identifiers, the structures. So what you can see, for example, in this PRT10. And yeah, then added a little bit more, but I think, yeah, that's questionable if I would do that as a manufacturer. Let me put it like that. So also here, maybe at this point of time, I think it would have been worth to contact this team because it would not be only in this segment, right, where such a UDI needs to be applied because, yeah, on instruments, I think we don't even use this HL7 segment.
Yeah, it was added pretty late, I think, in 2.2.7, I think, is when the PRT segment was added. So,
yeah.
And a lot of analyzers are, 2.3 or maybe 2.5. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Or 2.5.1 maybe, but
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. But that one, let's say in our
I mean, the idea of this cross paradigm IG was to be able to clearly explain all the components of a UDI and then be able to say, so if you have these components and you want to use version 2, here is how that translates, versus if you have fire, here is how that translates. So the idea behind this pattern IG was to say this is the generic definition, the information model, if you will, for a UDI. And then here is how you take this information model and apply it to the different HL7 product families, right? So that was the goal of this IG.
Yep. But I think, yeah, let's say in our area, it wasn't applied that much at all, right?
Well, I mean, it went with the, the newer versions of HL7 where, those specific elements were accounted for, right? So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we have
Yeah.
to translate it.
Exactly.
Either we have to pre-adopt these constructs from later versions of HL7 into our messages, or we have to, translate those elements into the older pieces like we're doing here in IHELAW, where we're using a 251 message. And
Yeah.
the OBX segment already has, an equipment instance identifier, OBX 18. So this is what we were using in IHELAW. And we were using it not for UDI specifically, but for parts of the UDI, right? Things you need to know about a UDI. So go
Yeah, I
ahead.
think I think it was very well advanced at that point of time. It was, thought
Mhm.
of that it should not be just one element as equipment instant identifier, that multiples are necessary. But yeah, let's say the way it is now would not be sufficient, or needs to be looked at. Let me put it like this, right? Because
Right.
yeah, there is not a let's say first repeat a model, second repeat, well, all these kind of things, it wouldn't match, right? It does not match with, okay, now take a UDI and put it into the first field, right? But I think this explanation comes next if you jump ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So here you saw it in a little bit as it is in the IHELAW definition, that about this repeatable and so forth. Yeah. So, but also here, let's say it is what it is, right? But we couldn't place in one way or the other the whole UDI.
Right.
And you end up, and that goes back to the very first question, right? You can fill in the information as repeats, but honestly, repeats are very badly understood usually. I mean, I know
Mhm.
that you are all HL7 expert, and for you it's fancy, but on the implementer side, it's
Yeah.
hardly ever used, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
you especially don't want to start using it here as a new thing and complicate everything. But even that, I mean, there is some standard work to do, which should be done first, and then we
Mhm.
can apply to that, right? But let's
Right.
say that is like the both options, explained. If you use the second one, where I would say, if we want to not rely on the LIS to put together the information, right? But that we want to have it from the source through the whole chain as the UDI, then you
Mhm.
would have to choose option 2, right? And here that's I think, yeah, not possible, but that's all in the text, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's
that would be
possible in the
some,
base standard, right? It's IHELAW would have to get updated to do it,
yeah,
to support using it this way. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's totally true. Exactly. It needs to
But
be
this is
updated.
also looking at the instrument, right? So this is not
Yes.
taking into account the reagent yet.
No, exactly. No, that's for now just the instrument. Exactly. But that means, yeah, here that's how these options are explained. I think you can go through that. Then it would look a little bit more like this, right? Different fields everywhere. Also here there are some pros and cons. If anyone has questions or would like to have some time to read them, we can stop for a moment.
Hi, Connie. Thank you for the
Yep.
presentation. I just have a quick question. Did you discuss at all how you would send multiple UDIs for things that are like ratios, like a calcium creatinine ratio, albumin creatinine ratio? I know a lot of those are quality measures that are reported in the US and things. or
Yeah, but that's not
calculated.
UDI. That's not a
Yeah.
UDI. Sorry, that's not a UDI. There's something else. There are different fields we would send them. Here it's just slowly for the device identifier, and eventually also how to deal with it with a reagent identifier. Nothing more.
Well, I mean, I guess my question is when you have like UDIs for the device, because some of these are multiple lab results or multiple analytes on the same device, but then they're reported out or calculated as a single result value. So there's one field that you would have to map multiple UDIs to. That would,
Well, not
right?
necessarily because
No.
I mean, you don't have to have a UDI for every single result, right? And so if
No.
if it's a calculation, you if you're using a software with an algorithm, then maybe that's the UDI that you put there. But in general, you have the individual results, each of which has the UDI of where they came from, and then you do a calculation, and that one does not have a UDI because it's not necessarily
So
coming
the
off their
instrument,
specific
yeah,
instruments, right?
exactly. Yeah.
They would be from a specific instrument, because that's whichever one the laboratory has validated and uses for that type of testing. And as Pam has said, there's a number of folks that do report out with these panels only that final result. So if you don't put a UDI in it, then you're not going to have any UDIs for that value at all. So there's a lot of different paradigms that are in use from a real world data perspective. So that's why I'm asking, because not everything is reported the same way.
As of now, nothing is reported
Okay.
in that way.
It,
Okay, so it's a more of a less step-by-step approach. The question was asked is, can you implement UDI on our devices? If the device is not the single entity involved in generating a result, maybe your example with the algorithm, then the one responsible for that needs another UDI, right?
Mhm.
So that's, but there is a first, let's say, intermediate step with an instrument with some reagents, and you want to transfer that first, and whatever calculations are later on, someone else's responsibility to bring in a UDI. But as of now, I would say there's still, let's say, we have then here for reagents and consumables, which can also need to have a UDI, right? It's the same question. There is in the inventory field or segment, there is again a possibility to send something, but also here there are then later on some restrictions how to do that. Also here I would say in general, IAG, LAW, any parties involved have to sit together and find a good way to transmit it. Otherwise, honestly, the manufacturers don't know what to do with it, what would be expected, because the current standards do not support such a, let's say, a real UDI
Right. The
transmission.
the INV segment isn't used
Yeah.
currently. Yeah.
Yeah, and but still, I also hear it was the standard is very well foreseen, right? It has different sub fields, but again, there we have, for example, a different maximum length, and that might be a limitation again. So
Yeah.
that really needs to be reviewed properly. So this UDI per se can be sent. For example, I think it shouldn't contain any brackets. It's another finding, right? We are looking here at on the data types. It's also important to review the data types, for example, to be
Yeah,
sure
I mean
that
the
can
CE
be
data type is
transmitted.
not really utilized for identifiers, right? But we certainly do have that quite often in some of the HL7 segments where it really was looking for something like an identifier, so an instance specific thing, but it used a CE or a coded element for that. So
Yeah, exactly.
some of the stuff we'll have to deal with.
Mhm. Yeah, it
Um,
should be revised. Let me put it like this.
yeah, we do. Other
And then,
thoughts? Oops,
and
sorry.
yeah, no, that's I think that's already closing to the end, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that was
and that was very old. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, how would you align it with the LIVD specifications? I mean,
Mhm.
it's just an additional format we transmit today, information from the devices or the instrument. Can it be adapted? Maybe yes, maybe not. But we just wanted to bring in this part as well.
Yep. Thank you, Cornelia. That was
You're
really good.
very welcome.
There's some
And
comments in the chat too. I know Julia put in about
yeah.
claims. I don't know if she wants to speak to that at all. She requested UDI data to track with claims to know what devices are associated with what procedures and patients are using administrative data. That allows patient level stories and outcomes based on claims across healthcare providers and sites. And I was just going to say, for claims, it's usually a separate area of functionality within the LIS or not handled by laboratory professionals. It's the billing department and other folks, and there's different payment paradigms, as many people know, whether inpatient or outpatient. The laboratory performs the same type of laboratory test the same way, and then it's handled downstream by billing for those types of things. So it'd be helpful to understand a little bit more about what you're thinking, Julia.
Julia might not be able to talk.
Yeah, she may have stepped away or something.
Yeah. Um,
And I mean, you're totally correct on your input, Andrea, right? But if you don't start somewhere, you will never get somewhere.
right.
And I mean, that's the only thing we as manufacturer came up to, right? We indicate, we saw that there are some challenges and updates needed of the current specifications we rely on when developing instruments. But of course, there must be then somewhere in the LIS also the ability to receive this field and store it together with the result, if useful, and transfer it upwards. But I think the requirements are very clear, right? The way is just that if we don't start with a definition, yeah, and a way to how we shall do it, it will never be done. Yeah. And again, that's also, I mean, that's, let's say, this are the two options you saw there. Shall we rely on an LIS to concatenate the UDI? Can be done. I mean, two values entering somewhere in the system, but that's again error prone, can lead to mistakes and so forth, right? And then there are gaps again, because they will certainly not do it for a reagent would change more often, right? An instrument is usually placed, installed, stays there. For this, you could manage it in the LIS. Certainly not for other components used to generate the result, like consumables, like reagents.
The other question too, it kind of gets into one of the bullets that Ricky has on the screen is that we talked about in the leader call is when you think about UDI used in the laboratory diagnostics business, that's pretty broad and covers a lot of items. There's the pre-analytical workflow, all the specimen collection, such as the tubes, do the tubes because they're medical devices, as we saw with the Theranos. That the different vendors or manufacturers will have some have additives, some do not. And you can add additives by laboratories, as we've been talking in the specimen call, for things like 24-hour jugs before different types of tests, different preservatives, those types of things, if they don't come from the vendor directly, which occurs across laboratories, so they can modify them, let's say. There's also some vendor systems that are FDA approved collection devices that are used only for certain tests or certain instruments or certain device platforms. So that's a factor. But you have the instrument, you have the reagents. If it's something like a COVID or a point of care test where it's a self-contained single device that has, multiple reagents, a card, there's a lot of flu tests, there's a lot of point of care things that are that way.
Right.
There's a lot of disposables that are used that are considered devices, from pipettes to microscopes to
But yeah,
calibrators, controls. And so one of the things we talked about on Leader was, it'd be extremely burdensome, especially with healthcare shortages across everybody, to try to support everything. So the question is, what would be kind of recommended scope from Shield on, is it going to be just the instruments? Is it going to be the instrument and reagents? And it's not always a one-to-one, because bioMérieux has a single UDI for their antimicrobial susceptibility card. And so in that case, you'd have multiple blank results, encoded results for each antibiotic on the card. They can be like
well, at that call, I can already tell you, you cannot mix it with the UDI, right? There's the LOINC is a different
right. They're
purpose
separate.
than the UDI, so keep them separate. That's maybe a good advice for Shield.
definitely.
But the point is if you have multiple antimicrobial susceptibilities reported for public health, you'll have all those antibiotics. You'll have a single UDI for that card, one for the
That's
instrument,
okay.
and then you'll have multiple
That's
separate
okay.
LOINC codes for those. So
I think that's
there's
okay.
lots of different structures, just as an example.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
maybe
think
that's what
that's
it
still
was.
okay. Yeah.
And I think we don't know the full extent of what all those different structures are across the laboratory yet, which still needs to be flushed out.
Right. So I think that's why we suggested here these two bullets. One is to look at a proposed phased approach where you focus on the device identifier first, and not so much on the instance identifier, the production identifiers. And then maybe also clarify what is covered, and you could say even focus on the instrument, and then the next would be test kit / reagents, or maybe both at the same time, so, but definitely propose a phased approach, right? The other thing that came up in an email chain, I think yesterday, was that or a couple days ago, Ralph shared the European regulations around identifying medical devices, which they require an identifier, type, name, model, and manufacturer. But I don't think that's really aligned with the definitions from the FDA. So, and I don't know enough about the European.
No. I'm here. Can already step in. The UDI per se is very clear.
Right.
It needs a registered number,
right,
within, let's say, ISO or GS1, and behind there you find information as the model name, the manufacturer,
right,
and so forth. So I'm here. I even make a stop to what Ralph is mentioning. The EU regulations are very clear in terms of the UDI for devices, and that's what is not correct here, right? It's really a device identifier part, which is a number, which is given by a signing authority like GS1, for example. It can be another signing authority, that's sure, and that might be different for US, but it's an approved signing authority. In this library you find additional information. You do not have to send that every time, right? You will have to send, so sorry for that jumping
no,
in here,
it's fine.
But I just want to be here a bit more. I mean, the topic is confusing enough. It doesn't need to make the differences even harder, right? So that's therefore, as a manufacturer, we have to provide that to get a number, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but then there are about currently worldwide, I think, 3 signing authorities for the device identifier part.
Connie, have you guys talked about, especially with Europe, I assume that you have laboratory developed tests or equivalent in Europe as well as in the US. It's out of scope for Shield, but have you discussed how UDIs would be handled with those?
No,
Either
because we are not the
cases,
legal manufacturer for that, right?
because there's a large volume of tests that are LDTs, especially when you start getting into
Yeah,
reference specialty labs,
exactly. And
pathology,
then it's
etc.
on the lab. It's on the lab if this is let's say, a proven test afterwards, or should be a proven test, or whatever is used for a broader context. The laboratory can reach out to GS1 and also provide all the necessary information, and then they got a device identifier in form of a number. Yeah, but that's, everyone who developed some kind of a test should do that. Yeah.
Right.
So I think the standard applies, and can be fulfilled. What is right now not possible is transmitting it in electronical format.
Yeah. Okay.
So I see everyone left and gets bored of the discussion. So maybe we follow up individually at another time, but on another location. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate really if Shield jumps in and also could provide some clarity. And as this audience here is well connected within IHE, within HL7, I think it's really it could be leveraged as an initiative out of coming of this group, because as IICC, we are just also a bit too small to do that, right? Yeah.
Right. But do you like with your IICC hat on, do you think that it's I mean more appropriate to push for like a device identifier level identification, or do you think it needs to be the full UDI, which includes all the PIs?
Yes, it should be, let's say, to bring any benefit to the table, right? It should be the UDI, and we can focus on instruments as a first start. That's what I would say. So, because there is kind of clearly defined, where we would send it, when we would send it, and should be maybe some repetitions, but nevertheless, that's a smaller context.
But if I'm sending just the green part, whoops, sorry. If I'm sending just the green part,
well,
of the
there
UDI,
is really no benefit, because I can translate this number easily to what's already, kind of defined on the LIS side, right? Because I need a marker to say, okay, this comes from an Alexis, or this comes from a Abbott instrument, right? And I already know these instrument names. I already know them. So
right, but that's the green part, right?
That's the green part. The green part translates to the name of the device, the model of the device.
And the manufacturer name, yeah.
And the manufacturer name. That translates behind that. But I think that really doesn't bring much value, because we are sending that, since I know, already in the message header record. Right? So I would not see any benefit if you do that.
Okay.
So it should be the UDI, because this combination is rather unique. And for us, let's say as manufacturer, yeah, it would be important to know exactly where to send this combination and not relying on upstream instrument systems later on, right?
Mhm.
But of course, I mean, the green part can be implemented in any upstream, yeah,
Right. I
consumer
mean, but
immediately.
from a translation into Livet and Leader, though, you only can reference the green part, right? Because you can't have
Yes,
all the choices for the PIs because
of
that's
course.
where the
No chance. I mean, this is
yeah,
what
right,
is sold and installed at the site. No one
right,
knows that.
right, right. So I think from a connecting of things to Livet and Leader, it's this part of the UDI that we need, right?
Yeah, and for example, in Live It, it's already
Hmm.
there. You already
Right,
have it there. It's already
correct,
there. So
right.
I think we should bring some, or we should ask for some kind of add-on after all these years of discussions. Because in
Hmm.
the limit file, it's out, it's there, it's, you know,
Right. But it's not currently coming across in the instance results. It might be coming across off the instrument, but so far the LIS isn't forwarding it in a lot of cases. And
no.
I think that's where where people still get hung up on, right?
Yeah, so Ricky, I really see, there's a couple of steps that have to be taken, right, to comprehend this. So one is, as you pointed out, if we focus just on the IBD test result and the desire to have information about the equipment that produced the result, and that information, just as an example, we would assume would sit in something like the IBD data hub, right? So the question is, how do you get that information into the IBD data hub? And to your point, Ricky, today it's not coming out of the instrument. So we would want to rely on probably a combination of Livet and Leader to, I think, as you pointed out, capture the DI part.
Okay.
And ideally, as the result comes off of the instrument, because in LAW we have OBX 18, in which you're required to provide it's a manufacturer, model, and serial number that, upstream, you could use that information then to create the UDI. Because
Yeah,
ideally with Livid, you would know what test was performed. You have an equipment identifier associated with it. If that's the DI part of it, out of the OBX 18, you're getting a serial number. So, I mean, all of that could be combined to put into the IBD data hub, the appropriate UDI for that test.
right,
And then, but as Connie's pointed out, down the road, you'd prefer that to come straight from the instrument, right?
right,
So then, that's when you start looking at these. If you go, hey, that the fact I've got the DI and the PI from the instrument, when it comes off through LAW, how do we want to, that's kind of the second part of how do we want to transmit it in OBX 18? Which one of those options seem to make the most sense? Then
right.
you could reduce or limit, the mapping then that's required upstream to get it.
So it sounds like we
Thanks for
agree
jumping in.
on for sure this.
Yep, I think you start with the instrument just to start somewhere and kind of get an understanding of what that looks like.
Right. And an instrument is a little bit broader in terms of what Andrea was saying. Uh, like, do we like for the one kit things like the at-home tests, right? Do we include those where it's, I mean, there is no real instrument, but it's still a one thing, single something we can identify. So what do we do about those?
Well, I think given the scope, or one thing we were hoping was to leverage the shield activities or scope of the shield activities to focus on certain aspects, to narrow that scope. So with a concept like the IBD Data Hub, I think we were kind of assuming, well, that's going to be information collected from, I'll call them traditional laboratory instruments, right? To where
Right.
you're collecting samples, running assays, and producing an IBD test result.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, you can pretty much associate a single UDI for the equipment to that test.
Right.
And so if you kind of at least focus on that and go, well, what does that even look like? Looking at it from instrument to final repository of the IBD test result, and ultimately understanding, well, where we are today, how does Livid and Leader get involved with that versus maybe down the road, and now what LAW changes would we need? That gets you a pretty substantial task to sort out and come up with an answer, and then maybe you build upon that to get to the other interesting, I guess, configurations, deployments, equipment.
Yeah, Ed, I'd agree that it seems like a lot of the discussion within Shield and then others about UDI is more or less with the high volume automated clinical chemistry or immunology type use cases in mind, where you have that separate analyzer that's in a laboratory setting. But but there's a lot of point of care testing too, that it's done with, handheld devices with different cartridges. And I know Abbott has a suite amongst other vendors, and so those are sometimes used in a laboratory, like a smaller laboratory, like we had one in an urgent care I worked at, where you don't have a high volume but need some of those specialty tests for patients that might be critically ill before they're transported to the hospital, things like that.
And this
Blood
is
gases is another one. So I mean, there's a lot of different areas of testing. So it might be,
Andrea, this isn't that they're excluded forever. This is
no.
Start somewhere and
Right.
and iteratively build it out. And as you're highlighting, the higher volume lab instruments, we have a little better understanding, right, of the UDIs associated with them, a LAW profile that we think could use to transmit it, ultimately a Livid file that can be used to do mapping. You start with something that you've got a little more understanding and constrain it to make that very first step.
Right. And so the point is, doing that, I think, it makes, I agree with you from kind of starting with the more commonly performed results from the high volume instruments, etc. And then working out, because there's all these different patterns again across different laboratory test areas that I don't think a lot of people realize. I mean, I've worked on projects with people and their eyes like light up when they realize, oh, there's all these varieties of these lab tests. So I think that's, to your point, is something that's needed to make sure that no matter what the coding or terminology and the modeling of the data, so it can be mapped to the coding and terminology or used in conjunction with each other, that it actually works across the board. Because there might be some areas where it may not work yet, and we just haven't discovered all those yet. And to some of the points that Cornelia made earlier too.
Again, if you take point of care devices, some of them support IHEW. Others use their own appropriate POCT1A. No, POCT1A is even a standard, sorry. And then there's even the others. But, I can tell you that most likely no one is going to be there to update the POCT1A standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we find some, great, then we can apply it there. But as of now, we should at least give some direction how, let's say, we could implement it in IHELAW, because that's something people were working on constantly or still are working on, right? So that's the benefit. And if such a point of care device supports HL7 in general, right, then they can, again, also find some way of help how to implement it. Whereas if there is nothing there, then no one will be able to really implement. these UDIs. So, and thank you very much, Ed, for jumping in.
Thank you both for the
And to
presentation.
your point as well, yes, we know they're also not automated, but still they have on the outside a UDI. So it's then on the ones who request the results. They can just make a scan of the back of the thing or the wrapping, and it's going to be a UDI there. But again, Andrea, here the question is HL7 involved? Most likely not. Maybe HTML or something else, right? Again, if there is nowhere a format description, it will never go anywhere.
Right.
And that's actually what we need to try to solve, because I think at least in the meantime we have these application codes which really help a bit into the discussion, but it's not yet saving the world. So
right. So in Europe, they also asked for the UDI, or they asked
yes,
for
of course.
more? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And remind me, what's the third assigning authority? Did you say it?
Oh,
I didn't capture
no,
it.
I did not say it. I did not say it.
Okay,
I would
all
have
right.
to
Okay, I'll look it up.
actually. Yeah,
That's
please.
okay, I'll look it up.
I can't remember what it is.
Okay, I'll look it up. Sarah, you have your hand up.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I've really enjoyed listening to it. I'm noticing so many areas to work on here. And Ricky's notes are going to be so helpful. I'm thinking about these moving over into our system as a USCDI comment. And if I may just suggest, you might highlight the pieces of this discussion that are directed for certified health IT in the US needs to be capable of XYZ, and the USCDI data element, A or B can be added or updated, etc. And then there's all these other pieces that you have here that, in order to get the whole ecosystem to be interoperable,
Right.
which given just such a great, those are, those can also go in the comment as
supporting elements
or recommendations to partner and who to partner with. And there are other mechanisms. So with USCDI being a floor, that's what it is. But there are other mechanisms that ASP/ONC can utilize. And so those comments are so helpful and useful, even if they're not, even if they're ancillary to USCDI, put them in there.
That's a good call. Yeah, we will do that. That sounds really good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, we are at time, so we'll probably have to do more in offline discussions, but I really thank Cornelia for setting us up and reminding us of the discussions we had several years ago. And so maybe finally we're getting back to it and maybe move the needle forward this time. And thanks everybody else for listening. Keep an eye on this Confluence page. Feel free to add comments. Feel free to add bullets. Feel free to add more topics. And then we'll probably have to maybe set up another call, or maybe work on it some more on the AllShield call in 2 weeks after we've gone through the updates. So we'll talk about that. And I'll post the recording and my notes that I took on a side paper, also to the meeting notes here, so that you guys can look at that as well for input. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you guys, some of you next week and others in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.